Perfect. Thank you so much. Risky.
Has it started? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Sophie. Hi, everyone. My name is Rizky. I'm the Science and Tech Advisor with the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. Welcome to the dissemination event of the Aurora project. This is a project funded by UK FCDO to promote technology commercialization in ASEAN. That is part of the UK's commitment to support the ASEAN-UK Plan of Action and the ASEAN Plan of Action on Science, Technology, and Innovation. Big thank you to the ASEAN Committee on Science, Tech, and Innovation, or COSTI, the ASEAN Secretariat, and distinguished colleagues for attending. Big thanks also to Accenture as well as our implementing partner, and also the guest speakers that will join the panel sessions later on. Just a bit of housekeeping in terms of flow of the event. We'll start with opening remarks from FCDO and the ASEAN Secretariat, and then followed by presentation of the findings from the project by Accenture. And then there will be panel session with guest speakers from Southeast Asia and also from the UK. In terms of audience participation, you can raise questions through the chat box. There will also be Mentimeter set up by the Accenture, which will invite participation from all of you. We're recording the event at the moment, so please do make sure to let us know if you would prefer not to appear on the recording. We will share this presented slides later after the event to you, as well as the copy or the link of the final document that was developed as part of the project. That is all from me, and I'll hand over to Fran Davies, who is the head of Global Science Department at UK FCDO, to provide his opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Risky, and good morning, good afternoon to all of you. It's great to be with you, and thanks so much for joining this really important session. I mean, I just wanted to start by just saying what a real pleasure it is to open this event and celebrate the completion of Aurora. I mean, I think for us in FCDO UK, Aurora reflects something that all of us care deeply about. How do we get better learning from each other, in terms of generating research in our universities and in our labs, but making sure that research, translates into real world impact and change. Because we know that, research and innovation has the greatest societal value when those good ideas move successfully, into the market and into everyday use. So it's been really great to see how this, how this project has really brought together ASEAN and UK, to crucially learn from each other and explore how, we can strengthen that journey from research to impact. So yeah, I mean, Risky shared some of the findings from this study, and it's clearly highlighting the considerable strengths that already exist, particularly across, the ASEAN region. But also it's helpfully getting us into that space to think about, what are those practical ways that we can strengthen that kind of innovation ecosystem? How can we, support entrepreneurship, within our universities? And how can we, which is the mecca, let's be honest, for so many countries, if not all countries around the world, how can we use research to really drive, economic growth, for our societies? One of the things I think that was quite interesting from this study is that, and unsurprising really, there's clearly going to be no single model for success. I mean, you know so well that one of the beauties of ASEAN is the diversity, the diversity of your strengths across that regional bloc. And it was really good to see the recommendations kind of reflecting those national contexts and priorities, because this has to be context specific to work. So for both UK and ASEAN, there's a clear opportunity here moving forward. Stronger innovation ecosystems create new opportunities for collaboration between our countries, but also crucially investment. And together in many ways, that innovation is going to help us together tackle global development challenges and drive sustainable growth. So I'd like to end just by thanking the ASEAN Committee on Science, Technology and Innovation, the ASEAN Secretariat, especially Dr. Zarina Mokhtar and her team, obviously all of my colleagues at FCDO, led by Rizky, and crucially Accenture, who have driven this project brilliantly. So I hope today's discussions, help turn these insights into some practical kind of next steps and recommendations to strengthen, UK ASEAN partnership further. But thank you so much, and I wish you a productive and enjoyable event. Over.
Thank you so much, Fran, for the brilliant remarks. I really appreciate your time. And now let us move on to the next opening remarks, which will come from Dr. Kancana Wanishkorn, the Director of the Sectoral Development Directorate of ASEAN. The remarks is pre-recorded, so I will kindly ask Accenture team to play the video. Thank you.
Mr. Franz Davies, Head of Global Science Departments, the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, UK FCDO, representatives from UK FCDO, ASEAN Committee on Science, Technology and Innovation, COSTI, and Subcommittee on Science, Technology and Innovation Ecosystem. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon from Jakarta and good morning to those joining us from London and around the region. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the final dissemination event of the AURORA project, the ASEAN-UK Research to Market Opportunities for Regional Advancement. On behalf of the ASEAN Secretariat, I extend our sincere appreciation to the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and to Accenture for your commitment to this initiative. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, these efforts come at a very important time. ASEAN economies continue to expand their innovation inputs, with regional R&D expenditure growing at an average of around 8.5% annually between the year 2000 and 2023, reaching nearly $60 billion. Yet, many ASEAN member states still face challenges in translating research into market-ready technologies and scalable solutions. This gap between knowledge creation and utilization underscores the need for stronger technology management and regional mechanisms that promote learning, connectivity, and coordinated support. And it is precisely this gap that AURORA seeks to address. The project set out to map the current landscape of research commercialization across ASEAN, identifying the critical gaps, and develop actionable recommendations to strengthen the capacity of our research and innovation ecosystem. The result, an evidence-based guide tailored to the specific needs and realities of our diverse region, is what we celebrate and share today. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, AURORA is fully aligned with the ASEAN Plan of Action on Science, Technology, Innovation, or AURORA PASTI 2026 to 2035, and reflects the commitments embedded in the ASEAN-UK Plan of Action, particularly our shared goals to strengthen research and innovation systems and to foster cross-border collaboration. The findings that AURORA presents today are not merely diagnostic in nature. They constitute a practical, stepwise resource designed to support institutions and ecosystem at different stages of maturity across our region's technology commercialization landscape. The guide draws on transferable lessons from the UK commercialization ecosystem and maps them to the realities of ASEAN, recognizing that good practice must be adapted, not just simply transplanted. I encourage all of you, universities, research institutions, technology transfer offices, innovators, and policymakers to engage actively in this session. Your perspectives are what will make these recommendations come alive and ensure that this work leads to lasting change across our region. Let us use Aurora's findings as a springboard to strengthen our research to market pathways, deepen ASEAN-UK collaboration in science and innovation, and build a thriving, commercially connected research ecosystem that our region deserves. Thank you, and I wish you a most productive and inspiring event.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kanchana, and big thanks to colleagues from the ASEAN Secretariat for the help in preparing the opening remarks. Now we have concluded the opening remarks session. We'll move to the next session, which is the presentation of the project that will be led by the Oxentia team. With that, I'm handing this over to Irene and Sophie and the team. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rizky, and thank you also from our side for the opening remarks to Fran and Dr. Kanchana. Just before we dive into the presentations for today, I just wanted to share briefly the code for the Menti that we have set up for today. So this will allow you to give us a bit of background about yourselves and also give you the space to express any thoughts and opinions on the presentation for today. So I will pop the link to this into the chat with the code and then start the presentation, start the poll in a moment as well. So I will now just hand over to my colleague, Dr. Irene Del Pos, for the overview of the best practice and recommendations that we found during the course of the Aurora project. So just a few words about Irene before she starts headfirst into her presentation. So Irene is a managing consultant at Oxentia Limited. And as you may have guessed, Oxentia were in charge of conducting the research and the study that has led to the final guide of this Aurora project. And Oxentia is an innovation management consultancy headquartered in Oxford with previous ties to the University of Oxford as well. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing here and hand over to you, Irene.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Can you see my screen? Excellent. So what I would like to do for the next 20 minutes roughly is to give you an overview of the project, so the Aurora project, what we've been doing, and present also some of the key findings. Particularly what I would like to do is, again, introduce our methodology and our way of clustering the Asian ecosystems. Something that was really important that was mentioned before is that we mapped the landscapes, and something that was really clear is that there's not one size fits all approach. So we spent a lot of time identifying strengths and gaps in the different ecosystems. Hence, we'll spend some time now in the presentation to report on that. I will also present what we think are the key value add propositions. So the initiatives or programs where the UK is best placed to help, to add value in strengthening ecosystems in the Asian region and strengthen the collaboration between UK and Asia. I will conclude by giving a quick overview of some of the best practice that we have identified, and that's going to be a segue in the second part of this introduction, which will be an introduction or explanation of some free best practice from the Asian region, and then just some conclusion about common thread across all clusters. So without further ado, context and evidence base project overview. The Aurora project was, again, commissioned by the UK FCDO and delivered by Oxentia with the support of Chris Haley as an independent consultant. And it really aimed at identifying best practice, critical gaps, and mapping ecosystem when it comes to commercialization in the Asian ecosystems. We focused on tech transfer commercialization practice, narrowing down the definition of commercialization to spin-outs, creation, and licensing, mostly in the deep tech sector. We cover 9 ODA eligible Asian countries, plus a light touch review of Singapore and Brunei. Our methodology was grounded in secondary data analysis. We developed a framework, which I will introduce in a second. We also conducted a survey and 45 same structure interviews with the UK and Asian stakeholders. We targeted a variety of different stakeholders. So we work with TTOs, policymakers, some private sectors, and researchers, entrepreneurs. We also conducted a review of the transferable UK good practice. So this is connected to the value add, the UK value add propositions. Our approach, so we developed a research and commercialization innovation framework. This was a tool that we developed to map the different ecosystem and the landscape and to assess the maturity and the readiness. As you can see, RCIF is inspired by the quadruple helix, however, is an adapted version because we replace the third sector with a more granular understanding of the knowledge base. So we have the national system that really covers the policy side, the funding, the government role in commercialization. We have market industry, so what there is an industry demand, what's the observed capacity and access to investment. And then we split the knowledge base into institutional, individual. Why? Because we wanted to be able to capture strengths and weaknesses both at the researcher level, so awareness, for example, about commercialization, incentives to pursue commercialization, and the institutional, what are the processes, what is the capacity within a TTO, what funds are available. We applied this approach across all the different landscapes and ecosystems, and we managed to group the Asian ecosystem in 3 clusters: developed, emerging, and nascent. These are the 3 clusters. As you can see, we have a cluster 1, which we define as developed, which we find Singapore, Malaysia, and Vietnam. The key characteristic of cluster 1 is a strong performance across the 4 dimensions, even though this is not completely uniform. We believe that the developed ecosystem are well positioned to act as regional anchors, so to be catalysts for commercialization, best practice in the region, and also exporter good practice. Cluster 2 are inside emerging ecosystem, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, and Brunei. What characterizes emerging clusters ecosystem is the presence of strong research capacity, strong knowledge base, but perhaps unevenness intra-country. I'm going to say something more in a second. And finally, we have cluster 3, which is nascent ecosystem, which we define as the foundational level. So there are some foundational gaps across the dimensions, and really the focus here is about ecosystem building. An important remark, caveat, is something we notice is a Pareto-like pattern when it comes to the concentration of commercialization activities, which means that most of activities are concentrated in a small number of mature institutions. This can be applied to developed ecosystem, emerging, and nascent. So it's a pattern we have identified across all of ecosystem. We believe, however, that this is potentially a strength to leverage and not a weakness in itself. So it's not a weakness or challenge or barrier to overcome, but a structural feature that can be actually used to strengthen commercialization activities. Something else is also important that clusters for us were analytical lenses. They're not rigid classification. So we appreciate that capabilities might overlap across groups, and some institutions in one cluster might outperform institutions in another cluster. Okay, this is like is a tool that we created to work. Let's look at ecosystem in cluster 1, so developed ecosystem. The defining characteristics is a clear recognition of commercialization as a policy objective. So commercialization activities are supported and prioritized at national level and legislation. Another key characteristic is a strong upstream research, so a very strong knowledge base that does not necessarily translate, however, in commercialization output, hence adoption as a challenge, not invention. And finally, the other key characteristic is the concentration of mature institutions, largely in big cities and government investor-driven. Within cluster 1, however, we noticed that with the exception of Singapore, which is a well stable and funded ecosystem, there is a policy practice gap. So sound policy, very clear objectives that do not necessarily translate yet into practice and programs. Again, the high publication and R&D, it's not yet matched by licensing outputs, particularly in Malaysia and Vietnam, and there is perhaps weak domestic absorbing capacity. So still a preference for foreign proven technology, so a lack of trust almost in the technologies that are translated and produced in this ecosystem. When it comes to cluster 2, the emerging ecosystem, the key trait is uneveness. Uneveness within ecosystem and across the ecosystem, which means that when we look at Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, and Brunei, we could not identify some clear patterns in terms of strength or weaknesses, meaning that each ecosystem has developed its own key traits, its own points of strength, and perhaps areas in which they could improve or strengthen. So unevenness and partial development. Something else that emerged quite clearly through the interviews and our research is that the commercialization process at the moment is really driven by some very passionate individual champions and mostly externally funded from international funders, philanthropic, other governments or international organizations. Finally, there is a strong dependence of public and donor funding and a still limited industry pool, so a limited industry engagement. Other trends that we identify that emerge are all around incentives, which are weak or inconsistent. Academic promotion is still dominated by publication, so research outputs are more relevant, outweigh commercialization, which clearly translates in a lack of incentives and encouragement for academics to actually focus on commercialization. TTOs are present, however, they tend to be under-resourced, understaffed, and mostly reactive. And the technology transfer offices tend to have different roles, so they wear different hats. As for cluster 1, also in cluster 2, there might be some strong policy intent, but patchy implementation, so slow funding, very bureaucratic process. And there's a strong disconnect between research outputs and the market needs, so the limited industry pool, so the market validation as well element. Finally, nascent ecosystems. When we analyze the nascent ecosystem, what became obvious is that there are some foundational gaps across all the different dimensions. So commercialization and research to market pathways are still very much aspirational. They're not yet operationalized. The challenge is really at creating the right ecosystem and the right preconditions, enabling conditions for commercialization. And the capacity building is still very much externally driven. As for cluster 2, actually also cluster 1, we notice a lack of incentives for academics. They're largely missing, which means that academics are expected mostly to publish. And TTOs, any process, also IP ownership are still quite absent and operational. So there's a lot of room for improvement in terms of policies, IP policies, ownership, and creation of TTOs. Regardless of the clusters that we identify, there are some barriers across Asia that we believe, again, cut across all the different ecosystems. The first one is the fragmented policy IP frameworks. While IP frameworks and policies are present, they tend to be fragmented, tends to be different rules that are often incomplete or hard to interpret. The risk is that to reduce the perception of clarity from both the researcher and the industry side. So there is a general lack of clarity and harmonized policy when it comes to IP. Uneven or weak tech transfer capacity, TTOs exist, however, they are understaffed, they tend to be reactive, and again, they wear different hats. Often they are researchers, often they have other tasks, hence they cannot just focus on commercialization and they have not developed a professionalized path. Incentives is one of the main gaps. Career progression still heavily relies on publication or teaching, so patenting, licensing, and spin-out creation are not rewarded. So a lack of incentivization. Limited finance and weak market pool. Early stage funding tends to be very scarce, and domestic industry still looks at international and proven somewhere else technologies. So it's a lack of trust somehow towards internal technologies. Fifth point, regulation and administrative burden. Here is really about a mismatch between regulation and scheme fundings and the innovation timeline. Slow, unpredictable processes do not match well with the innovative timeline, which needs to be faster and quick to mobilize funding when needed. And finally, gaps in market validation. So there is very little support for early stage customer discovery and structured industry engagement. There's great research, great knowledge base, but there's a lack of early customer engagement and validation. Overall, what we believe is the key gap is not the talent. Again, across the Asian ecosystem, we have incredible knowledge base and research outputs, but is the translation. So the invention disclosure rates, for example, are comparable to the UK, but when we look at licensing spin-outs data and incomes, they fall behind. As part of the project, we provided some recommendations for the Asian ecosystems. These recommendations were structured around the foundation enabler optimization tiers and the RACT in terms of priority. We provided recommendations per cluster, but also we broke them down at the institutional level, at the ecosystem level. What does that mean? It means we provide recommendations for individual institutions that can be adopted in the shorter term. So the individual institution, university, or research institute can directly adopt, implement some recommendations, but we also developed a system of ecosystem level actions. The ecosystem level actions has to require wider coordination after the involvement of governments and take longer to implement. So they have a holistic perspective about reinforcing and strengthening the ecosystem. All our recommendations have been ranked from low to high, and the ranking is based on the readiness and maturity of the ecosystems, and the support is already in place. However, it's important for us to remark that each cluster and country has a wide range of institutions with different level of experience and capacity. Hence, as mentioned before, there might be some very mature ecosystem, so very mature institutions in emerging ecosystems, and some emerging or nascent institutions in developed ecosystems. Therefore, we believe that our recommendations should be really consider based on the relevance, the potential value across the cluster for each institutions. As you can see, the top recommendations for the developed ecosystem is a better alignment with academic incentives. So really find strategies and ways to encourage commercialization or reward commercialization. It could be by promoting commercialization for some prizes, awards. It could be by buying some time off from academics, or for example, align promotion criteria. Another key recommendation is strengthening university-industry linkages. And this is because there is a strong correlation between good, strong university-industry linkages and commercialization outputs. So a way to reinforce and encourage commercialization in the long term is to, again, create those linkages early on. At the institutional level, in terms of cluster 2, we also recommend consider TTO collaboration, for example, hub and spoke model, so shared services in order to leverage the strength of the ecosystems and raise IP and commercialization awareness. Furthermore, we also recommend supporting local ecosystem connectivity. What does that mean? It means that commercialization doesn't happen in the void, but we requires a series of actors and stakeholders to be connected and present. For example, investors, support offices, local government, national government, private sector, corporates. So by increasing ecosystem connectivity, you increase the chances of commercialization. In terms of nascent ecosystem, really our main recommendation is at the ecosystem level, and it's clarifying political ownership of tech transfer. This is still the main gap. It's still unclear what IP and tech transfer rules and policies are. So that should be the key priority, and then the focus should move at the institutional level. The recommendations that we provide are just a part of the work we delivered. Alongside the recommendations, we also developed a guide, a quick step guide, which is really tailored at institutions and aims at providing some actionable and easy to implement programs and recommendations, activities that could really strengthen the ecosystem. The guide is built for practitioners, so it's directly targeting research innovation ecosystem actors, not just policymakers, and aims at promoting cross-border collaboration and peer learning within the Asian ecosystems. The guide and the report are clearly joined up, they're linked together, so the guide's recommendation and the report recommendation are consistent and they follow the same ranking and the same organization around foundational enabling optimization. Section 3, UK value-add propositions. This section focuses on what we believe are the opportunities for the UK to strengthen linkages between the Asian ecosystem and the UK and support commercialization activities in the Asian ecosystems. So why the UK can add value, basically. How did we determine the UK value-added proposition? The key point here is 1 and 2. First, it's the match between UK strength, so where we see the UK having some unique value propositions, some unique strength that other ecosystems don't have, and the Asian demand, so whether the gaps and needs. So our UK value-added propositions were determined based on a match between the strength and the demand. Second, we really focus on the ecosystem level. So it's impossible, obviously, to provide one-size-fits-all approach across hundreds of thousands of institutions. So our recommendation in terms of the UK value-add proposition are really at the ecosystem and national level. So there are ways to enable and strengthen the ecosystems and not targeting the institutions. We also look at the UK tools, for example, Lambert Toolkit, HEPSI, REF, and KEF as a starting point. So as a best practice that could be adopted and could be transferred with the right preconditions. Finally, when it comes to the UK value-added proposition, we focus mostly on cluster 1 and 2. We believe these are the high priorities because we believe that that's where UK expertise could be best leveraged. Cluster 3, we believe is still foundational, so it's a long-term vision and project to support them. These are the UK value-add proposition. As mentioned, they focus at ecosystem level, so where the UK could fund or convene activities, and clusters 1 and 2 are UK FCDO higher priorities, while cluster 3 is the long term. As mentioned, they're also ranked from low to high, and as you can see here, the top 2 UK value-add proposition are supporting monetary evaluation mechanisms that link to funding when it comes to cluster 1, and for cluster 2, it's funding a TTO capacity building program, so support capacity building in the region. Why we believe the UK is well placed to help in this context? When it comes to cluster 1, because the UK has a deep expertise in allocating research funding transparently, for example, REF, and tracking knowledge exchange, HEPSI. The benefit in supporting this type of activity is that data-driven, transparent funding mechanism that allows to better align institutional incentives and also attract international incentives and funding. In terms of cluster 2 emerging ecosystems, our recommendation for the UK value add is funding a TTO capacity building program. Why? Because the UK has significant expertise in practical technology transfer, so there's a practitioner approach, and capacity building. The benefit will be a tailored training and mentoring program or schemes that could allow upscaling TTOs in the region. Finally, for cluster 3, this is not high priority. It's ranked as low in our report. However, it's still relevant. We suggested looking at UK IPO to advise national IPO formation. Why? Because the UK IPO is internationally recognized for its efficiency, transparency, educational outreach. So we believe there's a benefit in building foundation IP infrastructure, and the UK could support this in each cluster 3 ecosystem. As mentioned, the UK funding, we believe, is most is likely to be more effective if it prioritizes systemic enablers. So really supporting learning and coordination across institutions and countries and not focusing on individual institutions. This is the last part of my presentation. It's about the good practice. So as mentioned, we've also mapped good practice, best practice in the Asian ecosystem, and we matched them against the barriers that we're addressing. Let's take a step back. At the beginning, I mentioned there are some cross-cutting barriers across the Asian ecosystem. For example, fragmented policy IP frameworks, or even a weak TTO capacity, or limited finance and weak market pool. What we'll be hearing soon from our keynote speakers are 3 examples of frameworks, organization, or programs that have been developed to target some of these barriers. So fragmented policy IP frameworks, for example, weak TTO capacity and gaps in market validation. So we will hear soon from our guest speaker again how the Philippines has developed the FITAS, our national validation and testing program, that aims at closing the trust gap that exists between research outputs and effectively market adoption. We also hear from our Malaysian example of Miranti, so a way to centralize and address, limit the policy fragmentation and create a one-stop agency offering different types of support. And finally, we will look at an example of a program that's been delivered recently by the World Intellectual Property Organization, supporting lab to market pathways effectively. So increasing capacity building for TTOs and providing mentoring support to commercialize research outputs. Before moving on to the next session, some conclusion. What we have noticed in our research, and we have found evidence of, is that in all the ecosystems, even in the most developed ecosystem, there's a very strong knowledge base upstream research that is not yet translating into commercialization outputs. Cultural risk aversion, administrative burden, fragmented processes, lack of incentives, lack of professionalized support staff are some of the barriers that are slowing down the process. As mentioned, the barriers are not technical, but are systemic and behavioral. Hence, the solution should also targeting more at the ecosystem level, whilst there are also some opportunities at the institutional. We believe that sustained progress for this ecosystem will depend on aligning incentives for commercialization engagement. So rewarding commercialization and providing career progression opportunities for researcher. Professionalized knowledge exchange, tech transfer capacity. What does it mean? It means upskilling TTOs, providing them with opportunities to progress in their career pathways and learn the best practice. I also believe that it's important to provide accessible transitional funding, for example, institutional proof of concept and small pot of money that can be mobilized quite quickly. And above all, a long-term policy consistency over isolated programs. Finally, as mentioned before, what we notice is the concentration activities in few mature institutions. And again, we believe this is an important feature that should be leveraged, not a weakness. Hence, we believe that some institutions in each ecosystem that could be used as an anchor institution and that could be supporting others in, again, strengthening their commercialization outputs. Now, I will stop sharing. I will hand it back to my colleague.
Yes, Irene, before we do that, there is a comment and a question from Fran in the chat. Would you mind just having a quick look at that before we move on? I think we have the time.
I mean, I can come in if helpful, but I know this is a real important issue in the UK. I mean, you'll be aware that we may well be getting a new Prime Minister who comes from being the mayor in Greater Manchester. And I think one of the things that we've learned over the last kind of 20, 30 years in the UK is just the importance of, well, the opportunity to drive place-based kind of growth through science and tech, in particular regions of the UK. But one of the challenges to that is getting our university sector to recognise and identify where they have real science and tech strengths, as opposed to trying to run at everything. And obviously in our system, and I think it's similar in ASEAN, there are perverse incentives for universities to portray themselves as brilliant at everything so they can attract students. But what we're finding is, what's most impactful is when places identify particular strengths and focus very deliberately on them. We're having conversations around the world on this, most recently actually in Kenya. So just keen to understand whether that came out of the study, because some of those recommendations you've made are clearly going to be more impactful if there's a real focus and prioritization within a country, and particularly within places. Over.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. Something else that emerges that they're going to be more impactful if there's a clear alignment with national strategies and priorities. So there's a place-based prioritization, but also alignment that is really important. Hence, to tackle the disconnect between, for example, institutional priorities, but also the national strategy. We didn't specifically address this topic, so it was not part one of the main research questions, but it emerged that obviously where ecosystems were leveraging the research strength, they were more likely to produce high quality commercialization outputs.
Thank you.
All right, lovely. Then we can move on to the case study examples that Irene also mentioned briefly in her presentation. So we are going to be hearing from 3 guest speakers, one from Malaysia, one from the Philippines, and from sort of an overarching organization present in the ASEAN countries. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Mr. Safuan Zairi, who is Chief of Ecosystem Officer at Meranti in Malaysia. Welcome, Safuan. I know you have slides to share, so just going to let you take the lead and talk to us about your work in Meranti.
Okay. Hi, Sophie. Thank you, Sophie. Hi, Irene and friend and everyone here as well. My name is Safuan. Let me just quickly share my screen. And I've been informed that I have about 10 minutes or so. And just let me know if the slide is up.
Yep,
yes.
We can see that. Looks good.
Okay. All right. Okay. So there's a lot of, I suppose I'm trying to compress a lot of things, and I'm not sure whether I can get through everything today. But first of all, I just want to say thank you again for the opportunity. We've certainly learned a lot as well by involving with the exercise that is being done by Accenture. And going back to the presentation, allow me to introduce Meranti. Meranti is it stands for Malaysia Research Accelerator for Technology and Innovation, and it has been around. It's been around for quite some time. It's just that it has different name before. The name Meranti was introduced in 21st September 2021. Prior to that, it is actually it's called a Technology Park of Malaysia, as well as it was combined with another agency that is focusing on startup. And Meranti is designed or has been put forth and with a dual mandate, so to speak. Number one is a developmental mandate that looks in terms of technology commercialization, in terms of how do we translate R&D, so how do we commercialize R&D as well as innovation. And then also we want to see in terms of how we can move up or improve the Malaysia's commercialization rate. And this has been an issue that Malaysia has been facing for quite some time. And I suppose it's not just Malaysia, but it's other countries as well. In terms of there have been a lot of public funds that has been invested into R&D, but a lot of the funds do not see the good returns. Yeah, and the research has been conducted, but it has not been adopted or commercialized. And then also in terms of, we've seen in terms of issues, in terms of how do we scale local innovation, how do we develop technology champion, and also how do we develop high-skilled talents. And this is something that some of the priorities that Malaysia wishes to address. And if you can see on the left-hand side is the developmental mandate that we carry in terms of how do we move ideas to from the TRL1, Technology Readiness 1, to Technology Readiness 9 and beyond. Yeah, from ideation, development, as well as moving on to commercialization. And you can see on the right-hand side, and it is actually this is another story to Meranti, because we are also running a technology and innovation park in Malaysia, and this came about in 2021. And the park itself is about 700 acres, and we have 13 buildings. We have 130 plus companies. We have 2 universities, Asia Pacific University as well as International Medical University. And this is where we are able to sort of like sustain the sustainability. From a sustainability perspective, we're able to then drive our business and create new values, by combining the program that we run from the developmental side, as well as the sustainability in terms of the revenue generated from running the technology park. We are a government-linked company, and we are focusing in terms of the value creation that comes about from the program that we run, as well as from the services that we provide to our stakeholders and tenants. Moving on very quickly in terms of looking at our vision as well as our mission. I'm not going to read it line by line, but it suffice to say that we are focusing on technology commercialization. That has been our mantra, that has been our mandate. And of course, we look in terms of several impact areas, in terms of economic growth through R&D commercialization. I did mention earlier, we wanted to improve Malaysia's commercialization rate. Yeah. So in terms of growing local technology champions as well as innovators, addressing national challenges, and this is also becoming very, very big these days in Malaysia, because we have identified mission-oriented initiatives at the national level, and it is involving looking at how do we address issue in terms of what they call that health security as well as food security. And of course, in terms of from an investment perspective, we are working hard to attract innovation and innovators, startups, in terms as well foreign startups, to be able to set up in our business in our park and expand to access Asia. And of course, development of high-skilled jobs. We can't do everything alone, which is why we have a role in terms of orchestrating the collaboration between government, private sectors, academia, and civil society. And we also found, it's a well-known fact that a problem by the government can be tackled by the startup from the private sector. Similarly as well, it is a good collaboration, and therefore that's why we bring in the partnership of this quadruple helix. We play a critical role as connecting the stakeholders in the ecosystem, and we also, where it is required, catalyze innovation, because it's sometimes the research has been conducted and has been completed, but it requires that a bit of a nudge in terms of for that innovation to be then adopted and also scaled into the market. And where required, we play a role of incubator. This is where our park comes into play. We have sandboxes that we run, technology sandboxes that we run in our park. For example, the autonomous technology sandbox, whereby we deploy or we test or we help company do what they call that evaluation in terms of their products related to autonomous vehicle, drones, as well as other related technologies. And it doesn't stop at autonomous technology. We also look into AI sandbox, also health sandbox, and a couple of other sandbox as well. This slide is actually, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of background story to this slide. This is the Global Testbed and Sandbox Alliance. This is something that we are doing right now. Precursor to the GTSA is what the NTIS. If you can see, there is a mention of the NTIS abbreviation on the left-hand side. NTIS stands for National Technology and Innovation Sandbox, And I think this is very, very relevant to the topic today in terms of technology commercialization. And because what we realize is that the issue in terms of technology commercialization for Malaysia is there is a big concern in terms of whether those technology actually works. And which is why we came about with this concept for National Technology Innovation Sandbox. We have close to about 15, 16 sandbox today. And take, for example, what I mentioned, the Autonomous Technology Sandbox. Regulators are concerned that of autonomous or AV cars is because, there are public lives and safety concerns. So what we use our park, we have 12 kilometers of road that has been dedicated for AV. And this is where we run tests, we bring regulators, they observe in terms of how those tests are being conducted. And then once they get the good green light, then they can and scale. And we also, from the NTIS program, not just regulatory approval, but also funding. And this is what we've done successfully over the last 5 years. And from there, we saw that there's an opportunity in terms of working with our other ASEAN counterparts, is that we can see from why can't we expand to a regional basis, right? Because we see that technology commercialization can be expanded beyond local shores. And this is what we're trying to do from a GTSA perspective. We are trying to work with ASEAN members, the likes of Thailand, Indonesia, and take, for example, the areas of drone. We have done a lot over the last 5 years, working with our civil association. And we want to see in terms of how we can scale those technologies into Thailand, for example, or in Indonesia, where they will have their own civil aviation bodies. And majority of the regulation or technology remains the same, but regulation differs. And this is where GTSA comes into play, where how can we work with other countries in terms of for the same technology, can it be used for the Malaysian technologies, can it be used to solve a problem related to agriculture in Thailand or Indonesia. But we need to do a couple of things, toy around with harmonizing regulation in the countries. And also we need to be able to work with funders. We need to work with universities across the region. So this is something that we are planning to do under GTSA. So of course, we wanted to make sure that we achieve accelerated commercialization, corporate working together on regulation, in terms of investment, cross-country investment, also building leadership, and also overall improving regulation, for example, in relation to drones across the ASEAN countries. I just want to zoom in very quickly into the next topic on our DICE. We've been focusing a lot over the last since January, because we realized in order to really push forward technology commercialization, you need to have good data. And we didn't start with good data, right? We didn't know in terms of, we still sometimes question ourselves, what is the true commercialization rate and commercialization value for Malaysia? While we put incentives across, across the supply chain, we are not sure whether are we really hitting or are we delivering impact. So what we're doing this year is really looking at basics, going back to basics in terms of getting the right inputs. We're engaging the research universities, we're engaging public bodies, private bodies. We're looking in terms of harmonizing the baseline in terms of what is the technology commercialization rate for Malaysia. And what we plan to do is we come up with, you can see the abbreviation MCIF, which stands for Malaysia Commercialization Indicator Framework, in terms of standardizing it again. It could be that we don't have one commercialization rate, we may have 3 or 4 to begin with, one that relates to universities, one that relates to funding agencies. But the point here is that we now have good data, we can work towards harmonizing what is a good commercialization rate that Malaysia needs to achieve, let's say by 2030, yeah? So on the right-hand side, you can see a lot of the activities that we are planning to do. Lastly, I just wanted to highlight that this is something also that we're working on. We realize that commercialization of technology is not for just the purpose of commercializing technology. It needs to deliver impact. So this is where we're trying to develop a system, and we did call it the system of innovation and scalable technology, because the problem is not about Malaysia not being creative or Malaysia not being innovative. The problem is conversion of those ideas and innovation into commercialization and adoption. So this is where we felt that we're going to start with national challenge. We're going to get the ministries involved. We're going to get the private sectors involved because these are the buyers. Yeah, we're going to build the innovation pipeline. We're going to, again, the sandbox that we've built for the last 5 years, we're going to bring that in order to be able to help test and also build new regulations if necessary. And of course, ultimately, what we want is to achieve commercialization as well as scale. So this is something that we'll be busy for the next, I would say, 6 to 24 months, really trying to bring in all the stakeholders from Malaysia, the corporates, the government, the universities, trying to align everything that we have done over the last 4 years, yeah, including the development of the RTTP, more RTTP in TTOs. That's something that we've done also. So you can see all of those that we'll be pouring into here. So we'll update. We'll hopefully we get an opportunity to update again in about 12 months' time. So I just want to say thank you very much. Happy to address any question that you may have.
Thank you so much, Safuan, for your presentation. That was very interesting. I cannot see any questions in the chat, and just in the interest of time, I think it might be best to move on to our next guest speaker. However, if anyone does have questions for Safuan, please pop them into the chat and we can reply asynchronously to them. Brilliant. Then I would like to hand over straight away to our next guest speaker, Mr. Napoleon Juanillo, who is Assistant Secretary for Technology Transfer, Communications and Commercialization at DOST in the Philippines. Napoleon has also prepared some slides, I believe.
Yes, I did. Just let me just kind of.
Of course.
Can you see my slides now?
Yes, we can. I think.
Yes. Thank you very much, Accenture, for inviting the Department of Science and Technology to this forum. And I'm just going to cover.
It's not in presenter mode. I don't know if you want to change it.
I'm sorry.
It's not in presenter mode. I don't know if you want to change. We're seeing the.
Okay, let me just. Can you see it now?
Yes, perfect.
Yes.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay. Again, thank you very much, Accenture, for inviting the Department of Science and Technology to this forum. And good afternoon, friends from ASEAN. I'm going to talk very briefly about this project that the Department of Science and Technology is implementing with the Commission on Higher Education alongside with 113 state universities and colleges and select private higher education institutions. Certainly, we can premise that, for just like Malaysia, as well as other ASEAN friends and counterparts, we're also looking at this in terms of the entire ecosystem and the various actors that ought to be involved in this whole process of technology adoption and commercialization. But there's one element that we believe we ought to be focusing on in the Philippines, and hence this initiative called the FIT test. And so, first of all, we're starting off from what the Department of Trade and Industry in the Philippines has identified as our strategic priority industry clusters, such as on semiconductors, biopharma and health technologies, agri-aqua technologies, renewable energy and circular economy, electric vehicles and aviation, and climate change and resilience technologies. All of this, if you take a look at some of the market sizes globally, they're kind of humongous, and we believe that it's about time, I think, for us to kind of educate or make aware our research and development institutes, as well as our universities and colleges, as they do their R&D, that they probably have to take a look at some of the, I should say, financial targets that are in store for them, if indeed we're going to be pursuing or the development of technologies and solutions along these priority clusters, and not just in terms of some, I should say, academic or personal pursuits, but also in terms of where the economy of the entire country can be leading to if we kind of become important actors in this regard. And so we say that Filipino science-based technology and solutions in terms of the global economic value chain can actually play a part. And hence, we're encouraging our universities and colleges to take a look at some of these numbers. A lot of them are still estimates, but more or less, we're saying that for every peso invested in research and development or in grants provided by the government, perhaps we can see an increment of about 62 to 80 pesos per peso if indeed we just try to be much more earnest and focused and be very clear in the directions that we're taking. And so we say that the strategic imperative is this, that Filipino innovations, particularly those emanating from our universities and colleges, they consistently underperform globally, not for want of merit or not for lack of brilliant scientists and engineers, but for want of credible, internationally recognized validation. And hence, the other one is that without the compliant proof of performance, investors, buyers, and global supply chains would categorize Philippine technologies as high risk, leaving billions in potential economic value stranded in our libraries and laboratories. And the Philippines lacks a scalable national validation workforce to certify technologies against international standards, and hence creating a structural barrier to industrial upgrading. And lastly, foreign testing dependence adds months or years to market entry cycles, eroding competitiveness and investor confidence. And so our solution is to have this non-regulatory national seal of scientific trust, so to speak, giving Filipino innovations internationally recognized validation credentials to unlock investor access, global supply chain participation, and export markets. And so we leverage on our universities and colleges as a distributed national validation network, eliminating offshore testing dependency and compressing time to market from years to weeks, if possible. And so we intend to train 60 master trainers along the six industry priority clusters that we have identified and certifying 500 or so FITAS assessors embedded in universities and colleges. So we create for the first time a scalable national quality assurance workforce. And in so doing, we convert dormant R&D into investable, licensable, and exportable assets, hopefully unlocking an estimated 50 to 90 billion in latent innovation value within the next 5 years. Let me just next. Okay. So our strategic framework is this one: a national recognized and internationally benchmarked validation ecosystem, ensuring the scientific integrity, technical robustness, manufacturing viability, and market competitiveness of Philippine developed products and technologies in those industry clusters. And so these are the strategic outcomes. There are 6 of them: a nationally recognized and standardized validation and certification, elevated credibility and investor confidence in Philippine developed science-based technologies, accelerated commercialization of our science-based technology solutions, global competitiveness of our science-based technology solutions, evidence-driven policy and ecosystem integration as a result of the learnings and insights we learn from various global markets, and of course, effective governance in terms of our grants and aid and other incentives that we provide to our universities. And so I won't get into some of the nitty-gritty of this, but we certainly have identified already the key activities for each of the strategic outcomes that we have identified, and of course, the economic impacts as a result of developing or initiating or activating some of these operational activities. So again, this is target 2 for elevated credibility and investor confidence, hoping that with the number of universities that we have and the surge of technologies that they have been developing, once validated, and even we say now that from the get-go or from early on, we have to know exactly what the market standards are, what are their legal requirements, system requirements, regulatory requirements, so that even from the ideation stage or the conceptualization of the R&D and the pivoting of the prototypes, et cetera, everything is really according to such standards. And certainly, we are hoping that because of this, there can be accelerated commercialization and technology transfer, that there is a little bit lesser questions would be asked by investors or other capitalists or other interested adopters, whether those adopters, by the way, are local or international, because more or less that we have actually, the universities have done their homework in ensuring that those technologies are on par with what's being required in the world markets. And of course, hoping that, and through this, we spur the global competitiveness of our products and solutions, given the, I should say, strict adherence to international benchmarking, and hopefully that we can also negotiate for a mutual recognition of the standards and test beds, as well as various, I should say, um, uh, ways of validating the products we have in our local test beds. And so we say that that could possibly basically unlock some of the economic potential of the products, particularly in terms of over 50% of the ASEAN market acceptance. So again, in all of this, we say that we're going to be coming up with a FITES digital registry and a real-time national database of validated technologies, certifications, and readiness levels. We want this to be an open access type of portal so that everybody learns exactly what the whole world is doing. And everybody learns also from the pivots as well as the reformations and reformatting that everybody is doing. So in this case, we enable in the investor discovery, we reduce due diligence costing and transform our R&D data into a national innovation assets. And certainly coming up with robust analytics would link our public R&D investments into measurable industrial and export outcomes. In terms of governance, we really want also the national government to start recognizing this FITES. We're going to be coming up with a FITES council composed of various other national government agencies in the Philippines, hoping that in the end, it's something that can see that can see several other administrations other than this current administration. And so we say that our tagline here is proven in the Philippines and trusted by the world. And these are some of our operational expectations: master trainers, FITES assessors, participation of universities and colleges, lead sites or key sites for the test beds. And so for innovators, they can track in real time how those technologies are progressing in terms of validation and certification, how they're living up to global standards. For the investors, they can search a database of validated technologies and they can connect directly with university-based innovators. But for government and industry, it certainly provides us with evidence as to where exactly should our R&D investments go, given what we now know. And so in all of this, we come up with a transparent, accessible, and accountable database and portal where all stakeholders would see the same validated and credible information. Again, this is just a reiteration of economic returns, workforce investment at scale. And so again, these are also aligned with our national policies, with the Philippine Development Plan, with the Global Innovation Index, and with the Sustainable Development Goals. And so with that, I say that we're hoping that this is something we've already done some of our initial study visits and study missions in the European Union. We're hoping that we can expand these study missions to other markets in North America, ASEAN, and East Asia. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much, Napoleon, for this presentation around the FITES in the Philippines. Wonderful. Again, we'll keep questions to the chat for now, just in the interest of time, and we'll move straight on to our third guest speaker, Mr. Charles Tuchinda, who is the chair of Autumn Asia and is going to speak to us about his recent experiences in the region and connected to a program run by the World Intellectual Property Organization. Charles, I know you also have some slides prepared, so please just go ahead and share your knowledge with us.
Yes, thank you, Sophie. Let me turn off my slide, my screen in terms of the video link because my connection is not very well. So I want to make sure it's not. See, share video, share screen. Okay. Are you seeing the screen now?
Yes. Just a moment for the slides to come on.
Okay, oops.
Yeah.
Settings.
Yes.
All right. Let me do full screen. Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much. I think my talk will be at the level of the individual research projects. And the moment is try to leave the lab. Right. So we talk about TRL 5, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And I think that's why you are expert in the room. I also like to share the observations of the L2M deliveries from WIPO into some lesson learned. Okay, as part of the ASEAN project coordinator for WIPO. So I start off my slide with the I think most important is how much budget has been put into the research projects. So as Dr. Kanchana mentioned earlier, that the R&D spending is about 8%, and for ASEAN country, most of us quite flat for some reason. And with the 5 ASEAN country on the slides here, the average is about 0.6% of GDP. R&D spending is very small. Right? When we compare to the Korean, which is funded program for the L2M, and they are doing like 5%. And if you look at the average of OECD, it's about 2.7%, which is quite a bit. If you look at this chart, it's more like the log chart. So the scale is quite big, jumping from one to the other.
I'm sorry, Charles. I don't know if the others, but I'm still seeing the first slide. Okay.
You see a slide?
Yeah, it's fine. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So so the question is not how we can get ASEAN to spend more, because it's going to be very hard to put in more money into the research unless it shows results. So the question would be how the research that already funded, that how can we increase the richer market? So I think that's a whole question talking about what we're trying to do, how we can commercializing it somehow. So we should not just expecting more budget spending, but more what they call it valorization of that, extracting value from the research ever spent for. So when I'm mapping this abstractly for the TRL 1 to 9, so that it's communicating to people across the ecosystem within the tech transfer, either from some researcher, incubations, tech transfer, because a lot of time when we talk TRL, it's only focusing on technology side, which is the blue color, and neglected the rest. So on the slides here, if we look at this from TRL 1 to 5, it's about researcher doing that lab, creating the technology, and very much focused on technology. And probably you see a lot of orange color. The orange is more of the understanding the issues that they try to solve, so that they can go look into the red color, which is IP, of how they can identify the strength of the IP or what the IP landscape for them to be able to develop a good research project. And when you look at that, so once you get to the TRL 5, where the labs stop already, then the landscape change. The skill set for that would be different. It's not technical anymore. So that's why the tech transfer are having a hard time, because the first part is their strength. They understand technology, they understand IP, they understand some of those. But then on the right side is more of the commercializations, the business model, the value proposition, turning technology into a product. And that is weakness of the researcher and also weakness of the tech transfer. This is where we talk about incubation, we're talking about science park, we're talking about other kind of skills, other kind of group of people coming into play. So it's very important that we need to equip the tech transfer, technology licensing or tech transfer commercializations to understand all this landscape of what they need to do, because they cannot be super person to be able to handle that by themselves. They have to reach out. So it's very important to improve that skill. Okay. So it bring back into the L2M. Right? So L2M that Whiteboard had is run since last year in November, training that identifying we have about 90 applications applied, and the program accept about 29 go through the training. And the training is an ATTP accredited 2 days course in training in Thailand, where when they're in Thailand, they're actually connecting with the local industry, the VC, the angel investors, the CVC. So and then among themselves in 5 different countries. So the training, not only the knowledge you go and learn, but also the networking that they gain from that knowledge. And then afterwards, there was mentoring program for 6 months. And that where a lot of things happenings. Then the showcase, which is the last part about showing what have been progressed. I think this program is good. The way it's set up is not to really have a final target as you have to be able to commercialize it, but as a progressing, because projects coming in, they have different sector, different timeline, different thing. So with 6 months, there is no way you can move from TRL 5, 6 into the TRL 8 or 9. So the progress is important. And even during this mentoring program, all the country that I talked to, they bring in the researcher or PI to join the mentor as well. And that's really something that unexpected, because most of the country in ASEAN, when the researcher talk to the tech transfer people, most of the time they look at them as an administration. They don't look at them as a partner kind of peer. But once the mentoring has kind of helping the team and then running mentoring, then the researcher realized the value of TRO can bring to their projects even before the TRL 4 and then going forward. And I think if we can really focus on that and making sure that educating happens and show result, the change of the institutions, the interaction between TRO and also the result of the research project will be much improved. Now, for the outcome, I think the outcome of the program is quite clear that from the 90 applications applying within a few weeks, seems a lot of demands that they want to commercialize it, but also because the training is RTTP accredited. And that's something that every country in this region that participating are driving forward to. For example, last year, Philippines and Thailand has joined associate membership with ATTP. And this year, Philippines is doing the same thing. Oh no, last year was Philippines and Thailand, and this year Indonesia is joining the association ATTP, while the Malaysia has already been member many years ago. So it's the ATTP, meaning that other countries are interested in human capability development and at the international level, not only local level. So if everybody are accredited to RTTP and they speak the same language, speak the same term, the cross-border collaboration can happen easier because we speak the same language. And talk about what the mentor project look like. I think when the progress made is credible commercial direction established, not just technical result, because most of the project coming in more of the technical driven rather than commercialization driven at the beginning. So it has to turn from technical into the commercialization, driven by a lot of projects changing their value propositions. Maybe they change business model, they change a target, and all of them have to do the customer discovery, which is most of the time it never happened. So what would be the what are the struggling still? The visibility of unproven without real world pilot. That's a lot of projects still more coming in from the lab and hoping that it will impact the world, which we all know it cannot. Right? Validating the cost of producing it. That is not viable for anybody to take it on. Revenue exemption is a key. And also identifying customer, a paying customer, rather than just a user. So because a lot of researchers, when they go through the research project, they focus on the usability and how the users can use the technology, but they not really spend much time in who would be the one who pay for that technology or business. So these are something that had been surfaces during the mentoring. Okay, and because, as I mentioned earlier, there are a few sector technology from medical, agriculture, and what have it, and that timeline is different. Because if we talk about 6-month mentoring program for the food that might need F&A certification, or maybe the medical rehabilitations or device might need preclinical trial, and that would be way longer than 6 months. And if I think if we run in the project in the future, that would be something we need to look into, how the time different for different kind of projects coming through. Okay, I believe this must be my last slide. Yeah, it is. So I think the best practice would be a clear purpose. This is just a commercialization gap, not only human resource development training on the fundamental or just theory. So it's not theory alone, it's practical as well. And the right candidate join. Okay, it's hybrid because there are some on-site and online, so that people can start mingling at the beginning. They know each other, and then going forward, they can really talk to each other. Example, I believe, if I correctly, is Philippines and Indonesia has joined hands to develop some research project that they worked on for the Japanese market from this program. And we have experienced mentor, which is helping a lot, RGP credit. So, right, so the recommendation would be, having, if that's for the future cohort, we'll have a different stream of training for the researcher track and technology transfer track, because they might have different perspective, and we would have to drive them. And also, as mentioned already, on terms of the different timelines of the mentoring projects, it could be in terms of 6 months. Maybe 6 months would be good for digital. Maybe 12 months would be good for the food, and 18 months or so may be good for the medical. And a WIPO commercialization playbook, so that can be multiplied into country, because some country might want to run their own smaller different projects. That might be a good model. And to plug into this, to multiply it, there are national agencies that would come to play, as Melanti is in the room, the OST, MESI Thailand, and also the Indonesia and Vietnam. So they get the government support to drive it, to fund it, to have a policy on it. And the ecosystem in terms of every country now that I mentioned, they have their tech transfer professional associations. For example, in Malaysia, ITMA, in Philippines, it's ATOP, in Thailand, it's AITP, in Philippines, the new coming, the PTTI, and Vietnam, they probably going to be one soon. So these are the one who can reach out into the ET community to connect their network or maybe training, and also connect to the angel investor, VC and CVC in the regions or in the country. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Charles, for your presentation about the program. It was very interesting. I can see we've had quite some sort of good conversations and questions in the chat as well. So we'll just keep all sort of follow-up questions to that medium, and which brings me great pleasure to say that we have concluded the section on case studies from ASEAN, and now it's my pleasure to hand over for the section on sort of UK best practice and some expert insights from the UK. So I will hand over to Dr. Christopher Haley, who was obviously part of the program team, as we mentioned at the start. Chris is an independent innovation and entrepreneurship policy expert, who's also currently the head of research at Startup Genome and has worked as a senior advisor to the World Bank, the Global Entrepreneurship Network, and other international bodies. So without further ado, Chris, over to you and then your guest speakers.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Are the slides showing okay?
Yes, it
Great.
is.
So thanks for the introduction. We're fractionally over time, so I will aim to be concise and keep to my 10 minutes. What I'd like to do in the next 10 minutes is quickly touch on 5 things. So I would like to remind ourselves why we care about this. I know that is probably self-evident to all of us on this call, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But one of the report findings was that it wasn't necessarily always appreciated by all stakeholders why tech transfer was a good. Secondly, I would like to set the scene for our guest speakers by talking a little bit about tech transfer in context of wider knowledge exchange in the UK. Third, I would like to address the question of why we think the UK can talk about good practices. Irena has opened that conversation by pointing to some of the good things that the UK is doing. I'd like to say a bit more about that. Then talk about what those good practices in the UK actually are, before concluding with a few remarks about why we think those are transposable to non-UK situations. So one of the main messages I'd like to start with is that tech transfer is a force for innovation and thus for social good. And that all of us on this course should be really evangelizing this message. It's true that some universities, particularly in the US, do generate significant income. I think that the total licensing income across US universities is something like $3 billion a year. But at the same time, it's true that most TTOs do not make a profit. So in general terms, we really should be focusing on impact, not income. And that echoes what Safuan said a few minutes ago about the importance of impact. And the impact really is huge. You know, if it weren't for the commercialization of university research, we wouldn't have things like penicillin, insulin, up to modern things like organic LEDs. Additionally, I'd like to briefly mention the work of the Nobel laureate William Nordhaus, who did some very interesting work on consumer surplus. He looked at many of the important innovations from the last half century. And his conclusion was that the vast proportion of the value of those innovations, something like 98%, accrued not to the inventors, but to the users. So what really matters is that we get these innovations into the hands of people who will use them. And again, this echoes some of the messages that we've had about adoption. Also to start, just to emphasize that tech transfer, although we're talking primarily about high-tech innovations so far, it's not necessarily about high-tech nor about commercial routes to market. We do in the report to talk a little bit about social enterprises and social innovations. One of my favorite examples is oral rehydration therapy, tremendously important, save tens of millions of lives worldwide, but the end product, it's a simple, non-patentable formula and hence difficult to commercialize through standard routes, but one that was brought to market through collaborations with NGOs with the help of the private sector. So to underscore the point that this is not really about income, and also to put technology transfer in a slightly wider context that I'm sure Simon Hepworth will talk about, this is a chart of business-related income to UK universities, and these columns in this chart are shown to scale. So we can see that even in the UK, with a very well-developed technology transfer system, IP income in dark blue, that's licensing income and sales from equity. It's really dwarfed by other mechanisms like contract research and executive education. It's roughly the same as facilities hire. So the big picture is this can't be about major income streams to universities. The other point to make here, which again I'm sure the guest speakers will discuss, is that there are potential synergies and trade-offs between these mechanisms. For example, institutions can decide to adopt very unassertive, externally generous IP terms, which might increase the prospect of collaborative research, but decrease the likelihood of licensing or spin-out formation. And obviously, this chart only shows the commercial routes, things like staff exchanges, secondments, events, student training. They're not part of the commercial footprint, but they're obviously hugely important translational mechanisms. So in the report, we have not taken a view as to what the optimal mix of these activities really is. We've focused on that dark blue column, the sort of narrower definition of tech transfer. But our feeling is that the mix of these activities is a policy decision for individual institutions based on their mission, based on their capabilities and expertise, and also taking into account the context and sophistication of the surrounding ecosystem. But we do want to recognize that licensing and spin-outs are part of a kind of wider set of knowledge exchange activities. So why do we think that the UK is a place that we can look to for global best practice? So Irena briefly mentioned a few reasons why the UK is well placed to assist. But I'd like to reiterate that the UK really is a global leader in a lot of tech transfer. People often look towards the United States, but that is primarily because the US has larger research budgets. If we control for research budget size, then on various measures, patent spin-outs, startups, industry engagement, the UK performs comparably or even in some cases better than the US. This last bulletin, the spin-outs and startups, is not actually really widely appreciated, that the UK actually has the highest per capita rate of startup formation of any large country. It's actually 3 times higher than the US, but that's often overlooked. Now, these are system-wide averages, but averages can be very deceiving, particularly when there are highly skewed distributions. Irena mentioned that there were Pareto distributions, Pareto-like distributions for much of this. And if we look at the top tier of UK institutions, there are actually strong arguments that they outperform the top tier of US institutions, again, once we control for the size of research expenditure. So in brief, these are some of the reasons why we think it is appropriate to look at transposing UK practices and considering them as global good practices. What do we actually mean by best practice in the UK? Well, in the report, we divide interventions into 3 main buckets: policies, programs, and institutions. In the interest of time, I won't go through each of these individually. So you'll have to all read the report, which I hope you've done already if you've had access. But I would highlight a few of these. So in particular, the importance of incentive structures. So in the UK, programs like HIFE, the Higher Education Innovation Fund, coupled with the impact component of the Research Excellence Framework, in my view, has been tremendously important. National monitoring systems, so the UK's Higher Education Business Community Interaction Survey, which Hamish has been intimately involved with for a good number of years. That is very, very important in providing a national level overview of activity and where some regions or institutions are performing better or worse than others, and hence where we can look on an institutional level for examples of good practice that can be replicated. In addition, I would also stress the importance of softer things like cultural awareness. Now, one of the justifiable questions may be how transposable are these to other ecosystems? And clearly there are some differences in national laws which can serve as blockers, differences in the structure of national STI systems which will affect things like where responsibility lies and how funding can flow through the system. Obviously, differences in national culture, which certainly can affect how industry engagement is seen and how even how entrepreneurship is perceived. So just to touch on some of these super briefly, policy transfer is a rather different discipline to technology transfer, but literature generally suggests there are kind of 4 common failure modes which might stop us taking interventions from the UK to other ecosystems. One is demand-side issues. So, for example, stakeholder inertia. We saw a little bit of this at the institutional level, but generally not really at the systemic level. So we don't think this is going to be a problem. Programmatic issues, like trying to transfer the wrong policy or possibly an incomplete policy because we haven't understood on the UK side exactly what makes up good practice. Really, the only way to mitigate this is to stay on top of current research. And one of the reasons that we've invited Tony Hickson to speak is that he'll be talking in a minute about his recent review from this spring and some of the UK factors that he thinks maybe are slightly underappreciated. The third issue are the kind of contextual factors. So in other words, an intervention might be a bad fit because we haven't properly understood some of the conditions in Southeast Asian countries. Obviously, the project tried to mitigate this through research. I'm sure there are some local factors that we haven't properly understood. But that said, things like incentives, our view is that academics everywhere respond to incentives because ultimately we're all human. And in the surveys, the complaints that we heard from academics seemed very similar to those that we hear from academics in the UK, Europe, and the US. Monitoring and evaluation, again, this seems a very cross-cutting issue. It's fundamental to programs anywhere. We see this built into all the programs implemented by NGOs like the World Bank. Training courses like RTTP, these seem to function equally well globally. And things like startup ecosystems, from what we understand of startup ecosystems to date, the ingredients of success do seem to be pretty similar more or less everywhere in the world. So we think that those contextual factors are reasonably well understood. And then the application constraints. So this is to say, even when an intervention might be a good fit, and it is definitely desirable, it might cost more than expected. Difficult to tell until institutions and ecosystems try to implement these, but when you read the report, you will see that there is a range of recommendations, many of which we think are relatively low cost and relatively simple to implement. So we don't feel that this overall should be a major obstacle. Additionally, the literature tells us that the softer transfer of ideas and concepts is often as important as the hard transfer of particular policies, programs, and institutions. And so some of that softer transfer is what I've tried to talk about in the past 10 minutes, and indeed it's one of the functions of this whole event, trying to convey that sense of what is important and why. So on that note, and because we are, hopefully I think we're actually back on time now, I'm going to stop. Just before I hand over, I just want to say a quick word of introduction about our two guest speakers, Tony Hickson and Simon Hepworth. Tony is the Chief Business Officer at Cancer Research UK. He formerly ran the Tech Transfer Office at Imperial College, and he was the author of the recent Hickson review into UK spinouts. I will hand over to Tony in just 1 second. Tony will then be followed by Simon Hepworth, who is the Director of Knowledge Exchange at Research England. Simon, I think, will talk about some of that wider set of knowledge exchange activities that I summarised a few minutes ago. I have had the great pleasure of working with both Tony and Simon in the past, and I can say fairly safely that what they don't know about UK tech transfer and knowledge exchange probably isn't worth knowing. So we're very lucky to have them here today. So on that note, I will stop and I will hand over to Tony.
Great, many thanks, Chris. Let's just share my presentation. Okay, can you see that? Yep.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Cool. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the sort of lessons I guess we sort of have learned, but are still learning in the UK, because we're all on a journey here. These are my own views, not those of my employer or UKRI. Repeating what Chris has just said, I won't go through all this. Knowledge exchange is far more than spin-outs. Although my review focused on spin-outs and how they work with investors, we need to acknowledge that KE, knowledge exchange, is far wider than just spin-outs. And one quick observation there is that what we have seen in some of our larger universities in the UK is over time their KE stroke tech transfer office separates industry engagement from the function of commercializing IP. And I think this is there is a natural tension between the people who are asked to acquire IP and commercialize it and attracting industry in and offering the best terms to industry that suit the university. So we have seen that sort of gradual evolution over time. It's probably a healthy thing. And another theme, I think the Aurora findings have absolutely cemented what happens here, is that over time, the way we measure what we do in tech transfer has evolved. And back in the 2000s, we sort of measured spin-out numbers. But of course, you do what you're measured to do. So we saw a huge glut, a huge explosion of spin-out numbers, but not necessarily the capital or the talent or the investors to support them. So over time, we've got more sophisticated. Iteration 2 is measuring outputs, so how long these companies survive for, how much money they raise, how many products they launch. And in the future, we're moving more to really being able to demonstrate the benefits and the impacts of those spin-out companies on our economy and worldwide. And as has already been mentioned, the only way you can do that is if you have good data. And the real advances I think that we've managed to get through are firstly was the HEPC survey, so having reliable data, but most recently, and Simon will probably speak about this, is the UK spin-out registry, where we can now have trustworthy data. And once you have that, it allows you to do new things. So that sort of bottom right corner there is talking about, well, where might we go next with that? So not only understanding what spin-outs we got, but watching their trajectory. How do they move? How do they evolve? Where do they raise money? How do they move around the country? How do they employ people? So I think we're on a journey here, but we're getting more and more sophisticated about how we measure our KE outputs and our spin-outs. I think in terms of IP policies and incentives, we've seen a number of different approaches over the years. Certainly equity in startups has always been an area that causes lots of sort of energy and debate, and was something that came out in the UK spin-out review and in the review that I did. But we are seeing those equity stakes dropping over time and coming more into line, I think, with international norms in the USA, probably because investors are becoming more international and starting to shop in the UK. So I think the key thing here is just decide on your models and just be clear about them. So most of the UK now employs, I think nearly all of the UK now employs the IP ownership model, where the university as the employer owns the IP. There are still some examples around the world in Canada and Sweden, places like that, where that is not the case. As long as you're clear on your model, I think that's fine. I think we are not yet fully harmonised, but are getting there in terms of letting academics both hold equity and manage the equity themselves. There are still a few universities that want to hold the equity on behalf of the academics, but most universities let academics hold their own equity. And then there is, we're moving, I think, there's a sort of debate between having fixed templates, so fixed terms. So if you want to sign up to this, you must sign up to these terms, because that makes you go faster. And the sort of setting guardrails, so sort of saying ranges should be between this and this. And that allows more flexibility, but stops the real outliers that tend to upset investors and industry. As we've seen the Use It guides recently in the UK, which sort of attempt to set some guide rails in certain sectors around what is reasonable in an investor university spin-out negotiation. Building capacity. So the really, I guess what we're very proud of and should be in the UK, I think, is the long-term capacity building that has gone on here to improve our tech transfer over the years. So the government, I think, should be congratulated for their HIFE scheme, which has run for sort of decades now and has really built capacity in UK tech transfer. And that has been supplemented by having a good organisation like KEUK, the old Praxis Oral, to support the training. And the key thing there was being consistent. The next thing is where we're moving to is, I guess, having focused a lot on capacity building, we seem to now be pushing towards more collaboration, and Simon will probably speak about this as well. So getting these tech transfer offices to team up. And also, there's also been a trend, I think, that we started off with STEM, we started off with hard science and engineering, and we've moved increasingly to now thinking more about creative industries, social enterprise, arts, humanities, and how you can adopt some of those approaches that have been learned and then change them for those different fields. One thing I'm not sure we've fully got sorted out yet, this is a personal opinion, is that we give out a lot of government stimulus to very early stage companies. But that's probably fine for a general startup ecosystem, which, as Chris says, is very healthy. But for university spin-outs, they require generally a lot of capital. And if you require a lot of capital, giving out very small micro grants and taking those grants can result in companies being formed too early that then don't have the capital to move on. So I think we're still working on what is the right balance there for university spin-outs. And then another thing that's quite interesting is tracking serial entrepreneurs, because I think that serial entrepreneurs are an important signal in the community. And what we found is that in the UK, we're still quite a long way behind the States. So typically our founders are forming 1 or 2 companies on average. And in the US, it's often 4 or 5 once they start on this journey. So I think this is going to be an important measure for us to measure in the future. On the sort of sharing and teaming up, many reports have now been saying that we need to get our tech transfer offices to team up and work together, because that spreads best practice and allows smaller offices to gain the capability of some of the larger offices. And certainly the sort of, you can start out with a centralized tech transfer system, like the UK started out with a centralized BTG model, but it doesn't work as you try and scale it. And so you need to have the ability to have this sort of hub and spoke model. One tension within that, though, is that universities understandably want to retain what I call IP sovereignty, i.e. control of their own IP. They don't want to give it up into a shared model. And that is natural. Most universities would want to do that. So it's about finding the balance between the two. We've seen some models around the world where a larger university has taken on the ability to commercialize for a number of small universities. But those models themselves are not always sustainable if the smaller university feels the eye has been taken off their own IP. And we saw this happen in Australia, in the Queensland area. So I think that, we're all still searching for what is the right balance between that sort of retaining your own capability and sharing with others. Where we are on that journey in the UK is that the UKRI funded a pilot now of regional shares, TTOs. I'm sure Simon will mention that. I think what I was saying in my report was maybe we should also be thinking about some sector-focused TTOs as well. And these are complementary. These are not instead of, these are as well as. And the reason for that is investors hunt by sector. They don't hunt by region. So, they are interested in a certain sector. So could we bring together the best of the UK across a single sector? And this was the data on serial entrepreneurs, where you can see here that in top right there, the UK is still quite a long way behind the US. In terms of sort of next steps, where the report was suggesting we sort of focus is we need to speed up. So innovation clock speed is generally need speeding up around the world. We have the advance of AI. We have countries in Asia that are acting as fast followers and can move far more quickly than some of the Western nations. And we need to really speed up the way we form these companies and the way we get them out. I think just within the tech transfer offices, we're also looking at optimizing the way we do things, so increasingly adopting AI. There's a lot of admin involved in tech transfer, and we believe, and we are starting now to adopt a lot more AI to speed ourselves up, and then commercializing in some of the newer fields. So in my world, in healthcare, we do a lot in therapeutics, we do a lot of medical devices and diagnostics, but the rules around commercializing data and AI are still being set. So we're still on a journey to learn what those rules are. And then finally, there's a sort of, we need to move from the tech push model, which tech transfer offices are set up to do, to push out their technologies. But we need to also complementary alongside it adopt more market pull approaches. And certainly in the UK, we now have ARIA, which is, I guess, our equivalent to sort of DARPA in the US. And within my own organization, we have things like Cancer Grand Challenges, where we set challenges and bring together global teams to try and solve them. So to sort of come to the end, the reports that I was involved in made a number of recommendations around finance, around universities and how they can support sort of interactions with investors, about investor interactions themselves, so making sure that you engage with investors earlier and you look for investors at the right time, and for building capacity and pace, particularly around ensuring there is entrepreneurship training more widely spread, sector-based TTOs, and improving investor literacy. One thing I think, though, is really important, and I think, again, this probably came out in the Aurora study, is that as you manage to, or as we have managed to, we're very pleased with it, get a lot of venture capital into the UK, and we're now sort of pretty good at that. You notice where the other gaps are. And there's clearly now a big push towards a scale-up gap. How do we scale those companies and keep them in the UK? But we mustn't take our eye off the ball that there is another gap that sits before that, and that is that proof of concept gap. Having small amounts of money just to validate some of these ideas. There's no point just keep filing patents on things unless you have some small pots of de-risking money to actually answer some of the key questions that investors and industry are going to want to see. So certainly that the report advocates that we need to fill both these gaps within the UK. So to summarize, we need to move faster. We need more deal toolkits. We probably need to use templates. We need to engage with AI more to speed up this whole process. We need to collaborate by both geography, by both proximity-based collaborations across our tech transfer offices, but also by sector. And in terms of our stimulus in building this system, it needs to hold steady for decades. It can't be kept being changed by successive governments. And that sort of that consistency has been a real feature in building UK tech transfer. We need to measure increasingly more impact, not the inputs. Get those incentives set properly, so we're not chasing numbers, and ensure that the rules are very clear. Academics want clarity on the rules under which they're operating. They're very suspicious of what they may be getting a worse deal within their university than what's happening in others. So we need very clear and open rules. So to finish, we need a whole system approach. We need to link all this up. I think we heard one of the speakers speak earlier about the sort of quadruple helix, and that is absolutely what we need to do. We still need to do that here in the UK and get better at it. But I think we are on the right path. I'll stop there.
Tony, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. Very, very clear. Lots of very actionable recommendations there. In the interest of time, I will hand straight over to Simon. Simon, we have already introduced you in your absence. So do you want to take it away?
Yes, I will do. So I've got a few slides to share as well. And apologies for not being able to join you sooner this morning, but let me get these up. And I'm going to just sort of set the scene very briefly on how we organise and how we think across UKRI and Research England on this space. So first of all, can you see my slides? Yeah, great, thank you. So I'm going to talk about what we do in four areas, which I think are real strengths of the UK system, and they touch on I think some of this underpins what Tony has very well described. So firstly, we have dedicated knowledge exchange funding in the UK. I'll explain a bit about what that is. We are very strong on data, so we have national data infrastructure, we have clearly defined data sets, and we publicize those, which I think encourages significant competition in the sector. And we are active in driving sector-wide norms. Tony's work itself is an example of that, but we have also something called the UCIT guide that I will explain as well. In terms of UKRI, we are an organisation of 9 different councils. I work for Research England. We are the foundational funding for universities. So annually we distribute funding for research, about £2 billion, and funding for knowledge exchange, £280 million, that are performance driven. So the allocation that a university will get depends on their performance, and hence the need to measure and have data sets. We have research councils that are subject specific, and they are typically competitive in nature. So calls will go out, proposals will be evaluated. And then we have Innovate UK, that is focused on the business audience rather than the research and academic audience. And they have recently announced a new strategy, which is more choiceful. So picking winners, backing breakthrough technologies, helping them become scalable businesses, providing concierge to those companies as they grow. So a more orchestrated model than perhaps we have had in the past, that was perhaps similar to letting 1,000 flowers bloom. On knowledge exchange funding, it's called HIFE, the Higher Education Innovation Fund. We have evaluated it. For every £1 spent, it has delivered £14.8 of economic return. So it's an outstanding knowledge exchange engine. The beauty of it, it is distributed across about 130 institutions. Each institution gets to decide how it spends that money. It must be on knowledge exchange, but there are about 7 modalities across knowledge exchange. They have the autonomy to do so. We believe they are best placed to make investment decisions with that money. I think HIFE has provided stability over the last 10 years to give universities confidence to employ professional services staff to really push forward in knowledge exchange. It's public money. It is well governed. We have a 5-year cycle with universities where they have to write a 5-year plan. We review the plans as Research England. And then there's an annual cycle of the mini plan for the year. And the allocation is firmly based on the performance metrics that the university has. And typically they are things like amount of research income that the university has with business, amount of licensing income they got on their spin-outs. So it tends to be income as a proxy for quality. We drive sector-wide understanding. A great example of that is a long period of work around spin-out commercialization, and Tony's work you've just heard, which is in the middle here. There are other activities we've done. The UCIT guys I'll come on to next, I think are a very good example of that. We've also increased our data sets recently with the spin-out register launch that provides a single source of truth that really allows characterization of the sector. And once you start to measure something, you can then start to improve it. So the UCIT guides, there are 2 so far, one on life science and deep tech and one on software. What these achieved more than anything else was establishing social contracts between members of the universities, members of investors and founders on what is fair and reasonable. So yes, there is a guide at the end of it for all to benefit from, but there are also a series of connections now across universities, investors and founders that if deals are looking out of shape, those social contracts come into play. We sat together across a 9-month process around many round tables, and we hammered this out. So why are you now acting in a way that's different to what we determined? And so through that, we've built, I think, a much stronger level of trust across different stakeholders. And I think this is replicable in different parts of the world and in different sectors. I would recommend looking at UCIT guides if you've not already and thinking about, could you do something similar in your own space? I think this slide shows quite nicely about what can be achieved through progressive work on policy. So having that consistency has driven down what was seen as a major barrier to success in the UK, which was the large amount of university equity stake. And Tony's report picks up on this as well, but we're seeing great progress in the right direction towards what I consider to be reasonable levels now of equity that universities are taking. Still some outliers, but in general, it's massive progress. On data, just to say, we collect data, performance data. You can see it. It's available on the HISA website. Key to this is we take the sector with us, so it's a process where we do to minimise the burden that universities have to report the data, and their future funding depends on that data. So they have a real incentive to report well. So this has, I think, generated a level of understanding that underpins the success of the sector, and we're constantly looking for what to measure next. A key element at the moment is metrics and place. So that intersection of what does knowledge exchange look like for local growth? What are the key elements to measure in that scenario? We also do some work on how data is visualized. So we have the knowledge exchange framework that you can see that here on the right hand side, and you've got pies here in a chart that show how strong a given institution is across different modalities of knowledge exchange. And there's a clustering that has been done to show if you're a teaching intensive university, this is what your cluster average looks like. If you're a STEM focused university or an arts focused university, this is sort of what we're seeing from universities like you. So it allows a level of comparison and hopefully is generating a sense of competition to do better. As Tony mentioned, in addition to this underpinning work, we do fund projects. There have been many great examples of that. Some have led to creation of investment funds in the regions of the UK. So in the UK, we have a very strong so-called golden triangle around Oxford, Cambridge and London. And we have less venture capital currently in some of the northern cities like Manchester. We have led and funded projects that have seeded new venture funds in Manchester, in the Midlands and in the northeast of England. So we are actively looking at how can we close gaps and raise the game across different areas of the country. That's a very brief overview, but I hope it gives you a flavour of how we think and what we do.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Simon, Tony, and Chris. I'm sorry, we're slightly overrunning, so unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have time for questions. But as for before, please feel free to leave any questions or comments in the chat. I see there have been quite a few comments. I've also shared a few links for everyone's consideration. Also, I don't know if the speakers would like to share their contacts, if anyone wants to get in touch with them to ask any clarification, additional information, that's also possible if they want. And Risky, again, I'm sorry, we're overrunning a little bit, but I'll hand over to you for the final conclusion consideration.
Thank you, Irene, and really what an insightful session we have today. So thank you everyone for joining us, but big thanks to Auxentia for putting this together, our guest speakers, our partners in ASEAN for the support, and everyone who has contributed to this. I'd just like to leave a few reflections as we bring this event to a close. I think we've heard that promoting successful research commercialization in ASEAN cannot just rely on a single model, not just because of different ecosystem maturity, but also because it's a systems challenge that goes beyond technical. So it requires connecting researchers with industry. It needs to strengthen technology transfer capabilities, and it should also promote monitoring and evaluation to measure impact. Those are some of the key lessons that I take today. The good news, I think, is that we have seen some solutions that already exist within ASEAN, as already showcased by the speakers. And we have also seen plenty of good practices and expertise in the UK that could support addressing these challenges. So I'm just hoping we could continue to learn from one another and strengthen collaboration across ASEAN and the UK to promote this further. So just on behalf of the UK FCDO, thank you again for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in that case. As we mentioned, we will make the report and any slides available to you. And I believe this recording is also going to be made available so that people can watch it again if you would like to do so. In that note, I will now stop recording